Okay, let's talk about voting. I was planning on doing this a little closer to November, but because of everything that's been happening, I thought it'd be the best time to say it now. One, in the comment section, no misogyny, no racism. I'm not even going to argue with it. I'm just going to straight up delete it. Two, multiple things can be true at once. You can be thankful, right, that Biden dropped out. He's old and decrepit and geriatric, and that he's gone now. But you can also still now critique what's going on with Kamala and how her policies are not ideal and how she is not the ideal candidate, right? You can do that. That is something that you can do. Because at the end of the day, the DNC's party and their agendas do not align with the common working person. That is not something that that party is doing. Yes, you can always say, well, this is better than Trump. That's true. But we've been saying this forever. This was exactly what happened last time with Biden. Not everything that happened under him hadn't happened yet, but we're like, well, at least he's better than Trump, so we have to vote for Biden. It's Look, if you want to vote for Kamala this upcoming election, do so. Make sure it's one of those things where it's like, okay, my vote is going towards this to take away a vote from, Trump and so on to hopefully cancel it out. Yes, that's not how that works. But it's one of those things where you're like, I want to try as my best to make sure that this guy does not get elected. It's not that I want her to win, it's that I want Trump to lose, right? But if you don't want to vote, don't vote. The only obligation is that make sure that you are being aware of the community around you and you are having a helpful hand. You Look, if you're going to talk the talk, you have to walk the walk. All right? There is shit in southern states and in red states and so on that are very much affecting people of minority and marginalized groups, trans, LGBTQ, all sorts of stuff, POC, like all of that. All of that. There's so many labels that you can't just put them all. Marginalized groups in general that are at risk, right? If Trump were to be elected because of Agenda 47 and so on, not Project 2025, because that's not his platform, is you have to be aware of your community. You have to be helpful. You have to, have that community around you and to be able to have the ability to help those that are not just in your immediate community, but also people abroad and so on. Because the DNC, as they stand right now, do not want to help the working people. Their agenda is not aligned with the working people and the average person. That's why a Democratic nominee that gets elected is not an ideal choice no matter what. We have to do more than vote. That's not something to say don't vote at all. Vote in local elections. That's one of those obligations where you're like you have to try and make sure that you use the tools that you have to do so. But I saw something. Look, the master's tools cannot take down the master's house. So you have to do more. All right? You cannot vote your way out of oppression. You cannot vote your way out of tyranny. You have to do more. And that's why whenever I see critiques of Kamala online, a lot of it just comes down to platitudes, but not genuine critique. My critique of her is the fact that she was with Biden for so long, and as VP, one of those things is that you advise to kind of teeter into certain directions, but she was still very much in support of a lot of his policies. And by doing so, that means that those same policies are now just under someone younger if she gets into office. That is not something that I want, and I do not think that that is something that is good for everyone. But unfortunately, whenever you say stuff like that, I've seen it all over. A lot of things come out of racist allegations because you're like, I've seen a lot of things, quote, you want to kick a black woman out of office before it ever happens without giving her a chance and so on and so forth. And No, it's not. That is not the reason. It has nothing to do with her being black or anything about her being a woman or so on. At least for me, right? It has to do with the fact of the policies that she has supported in the past and being rightfully worried and so on. And this is also coming from a privileged perspective, right? Because a lot of times you have the privilege of not voting depending on where you are. Um, and I've also heard of like TikTok recently of all the people being like, oh, well, Trump and Kamala are very similar. It's like, yeah, they are, but it's also very different when it comes to other states that are already having certain legislation put in place that are far more radically leaning to the right than some pro cop stuff of Kamala. This does not say that Kamala is an ideal choice either. And that comes back to the very beginning of you either vote or don't vote. Do one or the other, but make sure that if you don't vote, you are ensuring that you are helping your community to prevent and to lend a helping hand when with the legislation that is already in process. It's also one of those things where people were on top of cop cars a few years ago yelling ACAB, but are now willing to vote for a prosecutor. And this is not in one of those ways where it's like, oh, well, Kamala's so strictly pro cop, like wanting to completely militarize, right? And there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of nuance going on with that. And I am not entirely informed. I did as much research as possible before making this video, but there is just so much that's being muddied right now because of all the people screaming and so on. That at the end of the day, you can vote or you cannot vote. But you have to be aware of what you are voting for and be aware, right? Hell, there's a chance that there has been so much division recently. People are like, you have to vote for Kamala. You have to, you have to, you have to, you have to, you have to. There's no other option. You have to. But that's not going to save us. It's not. You cannot. A president is not going to save us from the shit show of America. A president is not going to save us from the already bad legislation in southern states and in red states that are anti-trans, anti-POC, marginalized groups, and everything else in between. You have to fight to make that right. That's why it comes back around to, if you don't vote, you have to become a part of your community. You have to make sure that you are the one lending a helping hand, even doing something like this, where if you don't have a group to protest around in a metropolitan area, making sure your voice is heard is important, because your voice will not be heard through the democratic process of voting for a president. And again, this also comes back around to the fact that I see a lot of people, such as white liberals, that are like, no, not Kamala, but then not offering up a solution, right? And the solution isn't just another candidate. It's not a third party. Third parties are out of the question, right? They've always been out of the question. I know if you look back to some of my tweets, I was like, well, I just might vote for a third party. Sometimes some of those were a little sarcastic. Other ones were a little bit more like, well, fuck, I'm not voting for Biden, right? And there is obviously the critique of, well, voting is taking part in the same system that is doing nothing but hurting us. And that is still a valid critique. Again, multiple things can be correct at once. And yes, I know this video is a little all over the place. I'm putting down a lot of opinions, I'm putting down a lot of facts, and I'm putting down a lot of perspectives. But this perspective and this nuance is what is needed to, one, make sure that my opinion is properly formulated so that I don't have, it might happen anyway, of people calling me out being like, you don't want to vote for Kamala because you want Trump to win, or it's because you're racist, or so on and so forth. I've seen it already. I've seen it to where you could have a person of color saying the exact same opinion, but because they were white, be called out. This is not one of those things where like, oh, well, it's just racism against white people. No, 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 no. It's one of those things where it's just, it's kind of funny to see where you could be saying the exact same thing, but people are like kind of jumping the horse and be like, oh, you're racist, you know. And obviously, because a traumatized group and so on and so forth, that you can better safe than sorry. But also one of those things of being like, guys, pump the brakes a little. Kamala is by far and away from the ideal choice. Like, even if she wasn't like very pro cop and so on and so forth, right? You want to make sure that whenever you are critiquing someone like Kamala, you're not just screaming with uneducated emotion. Your emotion that you are screaming with is from an educated point of view that it's validly critiquing the processes. But yeah, it is a lot. And if you skip to the end of this video, TLDR, multiple things can be true at once. If you don't want to vote, don't vote. But make sure you're part of your community. If you do vote, vote. You're trying to ensure that the other side loses. But remember, voting is not the only thing that will save us. This party, the left party of the Democrats, that I am not a part of, because I don't want to get that twisted either, because I'm not a liberal, I'm not a Democrat. Their agenda does not align with the common person, right? They will say as many platitudes as possible, much like white liberals will, to try and get your vote, right? They will try and be as many niceties as possible to try and get your vote. Right now, what's going on with Kamala is basically the exact same thing that happened in 2020 with Trump versus Biden. It was, well, lesser two evils, or, well, she's at least better than Biden, but she's still not the ideal candidate. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with her being a woman. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with policy and her agenda and what she represents. I also have heard multiple opinions, multiple of people being like, well, she hasn't said anything yet, so maybe we can try and convince her to represent us. No. She's for the Democratic Party. She's for the Democrat Party. You can try and say as much as possible. She might reference as many things as possible, but that does not mean that she will stick to that. Biden said that he was going to stick to many different things, but then ended up still wanting pipelines to still go through, right? It was the same thing with Obama many years ago, back in 2008, and in the second presidential run in office, is that he made a lot of promises, but then didn't go through on a lot of those promises, or a lot of those promises were double-edged, right? Like, 20 every minute 20 bombs were dropped, or like every minute or every 20 minutes a bomb was dropped on Syria, and so on and so forth, right? You have to be aware and have to critique not only the right but also the left Democrat Party of what they are doing and their legislation and their policies, because they are not for the average person, but they are still better than what's going on. That's why that while yes, it is a better stepping stone, you have to still fight. You cannot vote your way out of oppression. This is just me rambling to a camera. I'm sure there's a lot more stuff. I cannot list off everything, and I'm sure there's a few moments in here where I've misspoke and so on, and it might be misinterpreted. I am more than willing to have a conversation down in the comments. But yeah, other than that, click.